Phyllis.
Good morning, Peg.
How lucky we were. You're here from across the country, so we nabbed you to get your story while you were in the vicinity.
Yes.
We're here for the 65 and under. So let us not waste a minute of these 30 minutes because your story is very interesting. So why don't you begin by starting at your beginning, your upbringing, your family.
I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. My father was a factory worker, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. And there were 6 of us. One of my siblings died before I was born. He had an accident, and back then they didn't capture that he had a collapsed lung, and he died at home. So that's always been very traumatizing. But to me, he was always this saint, you know,
How
because
old
his
was
picture. He was 4 years old when he died. So we were the first birth after they lost him. So that was traumatic
for your
very
parents.
Traumatic for them. Yes.
But what a joy.
Yes. Well, the neighbors told my parents that they were blessed. They lost one son, gained a son and a daughter, because I'm a twin. So
that's right.
Yes. So
that's right.
It was what one didn't think of getting into, the other did. So
what do you mean,
great
getting
companions. Well, we just would go upstairs to the neighbor and not tell my mom, so she'd be looking for us, or we had got into all kinds of mischief as twins. We were very close, so that's been great. But my claim to fame is that I went to the first school we had in the city of Detroit. It was Our Lady of Sorrows in Detroit, Michigan. It was a grade school.
Oh.
And that's where I met the Adrian Dominican Sisters.
Oh, that was there. It was the first time you were there.
The first one that we were in the city of Detroit. So it was a Flemish parish, Belgian parish, and they specifically asked for the Adrian Dominicans. So that's how we got into the city of Detroit.
Well, that's interesting because we were not so famous in Detroit.
We were not.
Yes, that's very wise pastor who did that. So you went to grade school there?
I went to grade school there. I had a variety of religious orders that taught me. I then went to St. Catherine's, and that was the IHMs, and then the high school merged in the city of Detroit when they were consolidating schools. And so I had the Sisters of Charity, I had the School Sisters of Notre Dame, and so I had a wide variety of...
But there were no Adrians at
No,
East
not
Catholic.
at that high school, so... But I continued to, because I lived right across the street from the convent. So my mother ironed the habits for our sisters.
Oh, from Sorrows?
Yes, Our Lady of Sorrows, yes.
Okay,
right.
so you went over and helped the sisters?
Yes. We probably bothered them more than we helped them.
Did your twin brother go with you?
Oh, of course.
Oh, really?
All the neighborhood kids would knock on the back door, see if we could take their trash out, or did they need their car washed, or so we were always over there.
Oh, good, good. So what was it, sir? You know, you became an Adrian Dominican, but you certainly had the influence of a lot of other congregations.
I did.
Who was special, a mentor perhaps? That
I would say Kathleen Lynch, Pat Lynch.
Right.
She was a 6th grade teacher that we had, and I always said, when I look back over all of the congregations, if I ever entered religious life, it would be with the Adrians, because of just the joy and the laughter that we would hear and the fun that they would have in with the students. So that was always in the back of my mind, but I was 24 when I entered. I went to Mercy College, so I had the Mercy Sisters. I worked at St. Francis Home for Boys for a couple of years with emotionally disturbed children.
Right.
And then that's when I entered the congregation at 24. And Mary Phil promptly said that I was giving my old bones to God. So I always thought, oh dear. I didn't think I was that old. But
back then?
Yes, that's true.
So you entered?
In 1976, and there were 5 of us in the crowd: Kitty Bethay, Marie Michael, Scotty Hagerman, and Marie Michael. And Scotty left around Christmas time. And then Marie Michael, we always said, got double promoted because she went right to profession after the first year, and we went to the canonical year. So, yeah, it was great. Back then, there was a lot of experimenting. So I lived at St. Scholastica's and continued to work at St. Francis Home for another year. And Kitty was in Flint, and Marie stayed here in Adrian. So we had a really rich and diverse kind of
That's
experience.
right. I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the first groups that
Correct.
entered when I kind of stayed over at
Right.
Weber, was over at Weber at that time. All right, then where did your life take you, your ministries?
I then, after the novitiate, I went to Kettering Medical Center in Dayton, Ohio to take a residency in chaplaincy. I had had a unit of CPE prior to my novitiate, and I fell in love with it, but I also was living with Marie Willette at the time,
Right.
and she was a hospital chaplain at Henry Ford. And I just saw the depth of her ministry to people who were in need. And so I seemed drawn to it. I have a social work background, but I went on to get my residency, and then I came back and worked 10 years at Providence Hospital in Southfield and lived at Dominican High.
It seems the hospital environment is part of in your DNA, isn't it?
Yeah, the current CEO at Rose asked me, when I came out to the hospital, how did I feel about working in a hospital? And I said it felt like I was coming home.
Yeah,
I started my ministry in hospital ministry, and then I worked at hospice for a year when I returned to the congregation, and then I went out to Rose.
Now, when you say you returned to the congregation, let's move over and that little detour.
Yes.
So you were an Adrian Dominican, you made profession.
I was a Adrian Dominican for 21 years when I transferred
And then, after
to
that,
the Dominican monastery.
and how did that ever happen?
When I look back at it now, I think I was just going through a very sensitive time spiritually, and I felt that I needed more time for prayer and reflection, and I thought that would be where I could find that space and time. And I think what I brought back was just being grounded in prayer. And
How did you choose Farmington, the
well,
Blessed?
because it was a Dominican.
Okay.
It was a Dominican monastery. There were other Dominican monasteries throughout the congregation, but when I was working here at the Dominican Lives Center, I received a call from the monastery asking us to evaluate one of their sisters who had memory loss. And we brought Sister Mary of the Angels here to care for her at the DLC. And that was my contact with the congregation, or at the monastery rather, at that time.
Now, the cloister, for some individuals that might be watching this, can you explain what that environment was like to go to the cloister?
The cloister would be is that ideally you don't leave the enclosure, that you stay there, you have responsibilities, but you pray 8 times a day. You are up at 5. You're in the chapel by 5:25. You have morning prayer, hour of quiet time, and then Mass, and then another set of prayers after breakfast. Then your responsibilities, I worked in the kitchen, I worked in the infirmary, I worked a variety of places in the monastery. Then you had your noon meal, and then there was a profound silence for an hour, and then you went back either to study or to work, and then 4 o'clock was another prayer and silence for an hour for quiet prayer. And then you had your evening meal, rosary, and then Compline. And then it was profound silence from 9 o'clock until the next morning after Mass. I think it was very similar to our early beginnings of the horarium that we followed.
We kind of
Yes.
cheated and talked to each other. Did you?
Yes.
You did that too?
We did that at...
In between
Yes.
the recreation.
If you had to speak to someone, it was brief, is our instructions. Be brief in your conversations with each other during the day. But during recreation, you could freely speak.
So you're there for 10 years. Do you really know?
I was there for
11 Do you
11,
really
yeah.
know the women? 11. Do you really know the women?
You do. I was in the novitiate with 2 other people. One was a pharmacist and one was an epidemiologist, and I had come from the hospital. So you get to know those women. And then when I worked in the infirmary, I worked very closely with the older sisters. So.
Then you made a decision.
I did.
All of a sudden, you had your silence, your quiet time.
I lost my voice when I was in the monastery. and I couldn't speak for almost 3 months. I had to communicate with a board or writing. I couldn't, pray the office and chant. And it was during that time I started asking myself, what did this all mean? And I felt that my health was being compromised if I remained in the community.
Interesting.
Once I made the decision and contacted Donna Markham about coming back to the congregation, I regained my voice.
Oh my.
So I felt that that was a real sign that I had been listening and I had made the right decision to come home.
Was it difficult, asking to leave or getting the legal papers, etc.?
It's very different now, but I did have to write Rome to be dispensed from my solemn vows.
Now, when you say solemn vows, how is that different from the vows that we take?
We take perpetual vows, which means that we can't own anything, but we could manage it. In the monastery, you don't own anything. The monastery owns everything. Like if I got an inheritance, I would not be able to have any say in how that was, managed. It was be. So that's pretty much the only thing. And you're supposed to be in the enclosure in that.
So then you transferred back. In what
did.
year was this?
That was in 2008. Usually the transfer process is 3 years, but Donna had checked with a canon lawyer, and she had said since I had left the congregation in good standing, I was coming back in good standing, that I would, they suggested that I have a year of reintegration, and that's what happened during 2008. And then in 2009, I worked for hospice for that whole year. I came back in May and I started working with them.
Here in Adrian?
And then I started working with the local hospice of Lenawee. In September, I got my license back as a social worker, and then I went to work at hospice.
And then, first of all, we were all quite surprised.
That I left or came back.
Probably. First, let's start first. When you left,
Yes.
when you made the transfer, and then we went to, participate in the ceremony, and then joyful that, you knew it was not what you were being called to at this time, at that time. So there were other things that you were to be about. So what is happening in your life right now?
Well, in 2009, I went out to our hospital in Henderson, Nevada, St. Rose de Lima, the original campus. We have 3 hospitals out there now. And I was interviewing for the vice president of mission and also as a hospital chaplain, and I was happy to take either position. So I was chosen to be the VP of mission at the Rose de Lima campus.
Now, what does that mean?
In a nutshell, I always tell people that it's to make sure that our mission, vision, and values is really incorporated into every level of care in the hospital, and that we demonstrate that.
And it is.
It is.
From what I hear.
Yeah.
Wonderful that our vision and mission
Mm-hmm.
is carried on. So you're still there, but you've had some education in the meantime while you've been out there.
Yes, I've worked in ethics, worked to get a certificate in ethics. I was in the process of applying to have a master's in hospital administration, but then I was promoted through corporate to be a service area VP. So I'm over the Nevada market right now.
Oh no, what does that mean?
It means that I over all 3 hospitals and supervise the other 2 VPs of mission.
Tell me this, going back to your family, what did they think about your making this transition back when you left us and went to the cloister?
It was very hard for my family. At the time, my mother was still living, but she had dementia. So she wasn't really aware of it, but my brothers and sisters were, and that was very difficult for them, for me not to be able to leave and to come for events in the family. And they would come and see me. I could only have visits from my family once a month, so they would take turns coming and seeing me. and I can remember, you know, having babies born and not being able to go to the christening and that. But when my mother was sick and dying, I was able to go and spend the whole week with her when she was in the hospital. It was an exception they gave, and I'm always grateful for that.
And I think the cloister has maybe not as strict as they were back when you entered at this time.
Some ways, in other ways, it depends on what country you're in the cloister, and in what section in the United States. The United States takes the constitutions very literally. In Europe, it's not as literally taken as in the United States. Right.
So who along the line, you know, certainly there were some people when you were in grade school, Pat Lynch. Who else has been a mentor for you?
As I said, Marie Willette.
Marie Willette,
And
yes.
she was. I lived with her for 14 years, and that was very difficult. She was diagnosed with cancer, and we moved to Adrian. I was working here at the DLC, so we both moved into Adrian, and she lived in Regina until she couldn't anymore, and then moved over to here at the DLC. And but she just had this deep spirituality and trust in God, and she often would give her allowance to somebody needy at the hospital if there was a homeless person or that. And I can remember her saying to me, whatever I give away, I receive in double. Yeah. And so people would make donations or give something to her, but it was just that deep trust that God would take care of her and that. So.
And so caring, the two of you, with your cats, your kittens, at the time at Dominican.
Yes.
When you were hiding them or something.
Yes.
I just remember.
I don't know if we were hiding them, but.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
What has been the best time of your life so far? You certainly have gone in different directions and made some very significant decisions, and discernment has been an important aspect of your life. But
I always say my time at Providence Hospital, it was like my Camelot. It was that our director just gave us the freedom to really develop our own skills and talents, and we were a great team. Nowadays, you don't have as large a team of spiritual care as we did at Providence Hospital. And so I was responsible for writing the policies and procedures. And so it was like Jane saw something in terms of administrative, so she really helped me to develop that, and went on for certification as a chaplain. And then I went back to school for my master's in social work, and that was because I worked with on the behavioral health.
what about everything's not, you know, a bed of roses and everything's lovely and God's sending you all these signs. What has been a challenging time for you?
The challenging time would be for me with the being at the monastery, you know, and being formed as an Adrian Dominican and being rooted in that and being able to make your own decisions. And then when you move into an environment where it's the superiors making the decisions for you, or sometimes you think, well, why did they make that decision? Where
that happened in the cloister.
It did.
Certainly not in the congregation.
I think it was another challenging time would have been for me is I had some surgery, and following the surgery, I went into depression. And, you know, I have a whole different sensitivity for people who are depressed. You know, it was situational, but it really taught me an important lesson. But about depression sometimes is you don't know if it's ever going to end. And I think that was something that it taught me, you know, to appreciate people.
So that was an experience that really, you know, changed your perspective on a lot of things.
Right.
And how long did that?
It probably only lasted a couple weeks, but I mean, it was, that's why I say I know it was situational and that, but it was pretty scary to me, who I'm pretty even keel and that, and when I didn't have that sense of, is this ever going to get better?
Who was your support at that time?
I was living on campus.
Campus here?
No, I think it was during a chapter when it had happened. And I remember talking to Carol Johannes about it, you know, and just feeling that the congregation really supported me. And it really seemed to move me through it a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Any other experience, any other ministries, maybe not the one you're in right now, that there was a situation that you just stood back and it kind of changed your perspective on life, perspective on people?
Yeah, I think hospice, I would say,
Oh, right.
would do that. You know, people know that their time is limited, and so you try to help them say what is important for you right now. What is it that you want to accomplish? And when they open up to you and you facilitate them telling the stories for their grandchildren so that the grandchildren can hear their voice and tell them the story. Mm-hmm. Or it's that they have this one last visit and you get them to a point where they can do that and complete some wishes that they had. It's very, very profound is the trust that people place in you.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. And what comes out of you to them mm-hmm. has got to be, we know that's of God, mm-hmm. of the Spirit, mm-hmm. which is,
really,
you know.
yes.
And probably a great gift you had was, you had many gifts, but was the depression.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, to even share that with us, mm-hmm. you know, to have that experience mm-hmm. is unique. Mm-hmm. And you've met people
absolutely.
With depression. What would you say to someone that you are wondering, or they've told you, or you surmise that they're experiencing depression?
I think I would suggest that they openly talk about it. You know, don't pretend that you're happy or that life is going to get better. It's the staying in the moment and discovering what it has to teach you. That I think for me it was at midlife, and so again it was like looking back and, you know, does my life have any purpose? Right. And then being able to move ahead and to say what did this experience teach me? I think that's something that's so grounded in me is no matter what experience I have, I ask the question, what is it supposed to teach me? Mm-hmm. And that's even the experience. I think it took about 10 years to even integrate the monastic experience for me, saying, you know, what were those years really about, and what was I supposed to learn during that time, and then take it forward. You know.
What's the greatest learning you had in the I was going to say the cemetery.
It could be perceived as that.
Ooh, in the cloister.
I think for me it was that to always be able to speak your truth.
Good.
You know, don't ever give your power or your voice away, but to be able to speak the truth from your heart, that you know it. And I think that's what even depression is, speaking from the heart.
Yes, yeah.
And being able to speak your truth is. And nobody may be there with you, but for you to know what that truth is.
And to be vulnerable enough to know I've got flaws. Mm-hmm. I think we try to give the persona that everything's fine when down underneath.
And I think even in our flaws and our weaknesses, be able to say, what do I need to learn, you know? Or, you know, sometimes when I get upset, I'll say, well, why did that situation is so upsetting to you? And to be able to name it so that you can really then move beyond it instead of staying in the anger. You know, what has it got to teach me? Yeah.
What do you most like about yourself?
I have a great sense of humor. I love to cook. And being an introvert, I love on the weekends to do needlework. Or this week, these 2 weeks here have been wonderful because I've sat out on the front porch of Maria and just watched the sun come up and hear the birds. And to have that alone time, I think, is what nurtures me as an introvert. Because I'm forced in a lot of ways to be extroverted in my ministry. And
the position that you're in right now calls you to be on call, calls you to be involved with people, calls you to be in situations that are stressful, that are funny, that are depressing, that are everything. And you can get so engrossed in that unless you take the step to step back and what is this all about?
And when I greet people, in the hospital, they'll say, "Good morning, how are you?" And I come back with, "I'm blessed."
Mm-hmm.
You know, because what we see every single day in a hospital or in whatever situation
Mm-hmm.
we're in, to realize that we're really blessed to be where we are.
Phyllis, how do you want to be remembered?
Someone who loved life, also very committed to whatever ministry she was in, really gave of herself, and enjoyed it along the way.
Good. And you gave of yourself when you were in ministry here at the DLC.
I did.
Way back, when was that again?
It was in 94 to 97.
Oh, that was a long time, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there you went?
I went to the monastery in 97.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then I came back in 2008.
Okay,
yeah.
so that was just before the monastery.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell all of us? You know, this is on the congregation website, and it's on YouTube, and our co-workers are watching. Any other gem you'd like to say? This is a perfect time.
I think to be settled in who you are and
Okay.
give from that. Give from your heart. Give from where you're grounded, and people will be blessed by that. And when you are connected with other people, you're blessed in return. And so I feel every day I'm blessed multiple times by the encounters that we have.
Good, wonderful. Well, thank you again for saying yes when I wrote to you and you didn't respond, but then you came and said, "I'm going to do it." That's what you think. I put somebody else in you. Thank you so much.
You're
and
welcome.
just know the congregation, I speak for the congregation, we thank you for your ministry with us and all that treasure you had in the cloister that you brought back and share so generously with everyone that you encounter. You're in a wonderful ministry.
Yes.
Yeah. And I should have gotten into, you had people, we still have time, I think. You had people during the bombing out in Vegas.
We did.
How was the
did.
hospital affected?
We were called, I was on call that night, and I got the phone call that there were casualties, injuries coming into the hospital, and we would need more spiritual care to come, so I had to call chaplains in. I went in over to the hospital at Rose de Lima. Over the length of the time, we saw anywhere from 67 to 87 people who had been injured. Siena, our tertiary hospital, saw many more that needed surgery. We had maybe someone who had stepped on glass, or someone crawling over something broke their leg, and that. One of our nurses was added, and her husband was shot and killed. He was a police officer. So we've still been walking that journey with her, and she's come back to the hospital to do that. So yeah, I think what I always say that the shooter took away from us was the sense of safety, that you don't feel safe on the strip anymore. And so you go down with a little more caution in that. But it really brought people together. The blessing for this was when they had the shooting in Orlando at the nightclub, their staff got a banner and signed it and sent it to us. And so it was very, very touching. And then there was the shooting in Texas, and our staff then did a banner and sent it down so that
Pay it forward.
we could let people know. And I think the thing for our staff is that these people really did know what we were feeling and experiencing. So
because we haven't experienced it. I hope I never do. Right?
Yes, yeah. So that was.
And you're not only giving to being in service to the staff, but to the patients.
Correct.
And to the family members.
Yes, yeah.
Just traumatic. So who was the support to you during that whole thing?
Well, it was very interesting. A lot of our sisters reached out to us and said that they were praying, wanted to know how we were doing. I think that's the leadership that we have at Rose de Lima. We really are very close, and we give each other that space and that time to support each other. So,
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Very enriched life you have and are having.
Absolutely.
And we are blessed by it, just having you in our presence. So we'll see you next August, right? Or is it July? For the gathering.
Yes. Hopefully it'll be before that. But
Oh, good, good. All right, thank you again,
Thank you.
Phyllis. Safe travels back to
Thank you.
Henderson. I was going to say Vegas. You mentioned when you go down to the Strip. You don't go to the Strip, though.
only for when guests come in.
That's right, that's right. Okay, thank you.